When I was in university, I remember back in 2000 or so, the Second Intifada had just begun in Israel. And there were a lot of posters around the campus put up in different halls and stuff showing the killing of Mohammed al-Dura in Gaza in an exchange of fire between the Israeli forces and Palestinians. And at the time, we were basically told that, Israel had targeted this child. And there were all these groups that were opposed to Israel. I don't remember all their names, and I don't need to go into each individual one, but I just remember on campus there was this feeling that even though we were in Tucson, Arizona, where there are all sorts of troubles, like, for instance, issues with the border and immigration and poverty and all these things, that there were all these students who came to university at age 18 and were being recruited to basically focus their lives on a country or a conflict thousands of miles away. And at the time, it seemed totally normal. I mean, of course, we as Americans, growing up, we have a right to spend most of our time worrying about some, small Bedouin village in the West Bank, far more than, say, 11 million undocumented, people who could use support, right around the corner from our house. So this mentality, this privilege, was bred into us to focus on these foreign issues, particularly Israel. And it was a kind of, let's say in retrospect, a kind of neo-colonialist privilege, this idea that I'm going to fix this conflict halfway around the world, and I'm not going to bother with what happens, 2 feet away. So this idea of fixing the world, this manifest destiny, this concept, it's bred in. And I remember in class, we had a class in political science where was one of these Israel-Palestinian conflict, the whole class on it, and we were supposed to solve the conflict. Even back in grade school, I had a teacher who made us read Alan Hart's book on Arafat called Terrorist and Peacemaker. And we were also told, at the age of 11, 12 years old, how we can solve the conflict. So from a very young age, a generation is raised with the idea that the whole world is like a kind of monopoly board, and you can just solve it the way you trade properties in Monopoly. And we were kind of told that that's how things work in the Middle East. We'll just move these people from here to here, and these people can be moved here, and then we'll just solve it. Well, that's how we solve it, and there's extremists on both sides, and there's a cycle of violence, and, people are against peace, but, we solved Northern Ireland, and we solved other things, so we'll just solve that. And now it's been 20 years or so, and there are some people still in the West, especially basically only in the West, that dwell on this today, and they still make a profit at universities as professors or running NGOs or tweeting or whatever, or running some group, make a profit on the conflict. And it's interesting because you have to ask yourself, what's really going on? How is it possible that so many people, mostly this generation, let's say, the generation, say, born, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, but how is it possible there are so many people who are given the option, growing up, to be basically professional anti-Israel activists? And I don't want to say pro-Palestinian, because I think most of them are not really pro-Palestinian. They're not really interested in Palestinians at all. It's about Israel. It's not really about Palestine. And they spend their lives, sometimes, through a career that gives them the excuse to do this, basically every day angry and talking about Israel, tweeting about Israel, and it's all they do. And they never even been to Israel, of course. They don't even have to leave, New York City or London or whatever. It's a instant gratification that they are instant experts on some place far away, whose lives they can condemn or who they can celebrate, the deaths of people sometimes. You see them, for instance, when pro-Israel donor Sheldon Adelson passed away. You saw people celebrating, saying it's a birthday present for me. And you wonder about this. Okay, what is this Western thing that people have this thing about? I'm waiting for someone to die, or I'm really happy that bus bombing took place. It's great. What is that privilege? What is that colonial style privilege that's spread into some people? And it's a whole generation of us. And without having to name names, we all know the professors and the heads of various groups that made a name for themselves, and they say, well, why is this person famous? Oh, well, she's an anti-Israel activist. Here you have a person living in London or New York or San Francisco, and they make an entire career or living out of hating a country halfway around the world. And there's no parallel in any other circumstance like that. If you're online and you post a picture, like I once did, I posted a picture of a bird or something, and I said, this is a picture of a peacock in southern Israel. I know all the comments were bashing it and saying, oh, that's really Palestine, etc., etc. And I wonder, what is it that creates people, a whole generation of them, that felt that it would be normal to spend their lives focusing on a country thousands of miles away, and that would be something that they could do normally, not that they would be seen as weirdos and mean crazy no, that's all they do. And there's no parallel of these people with people that all they do every day is they hate Japan. I'm a professional anti-Japan activist. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as people who every day get up and are anti-Uganda activists. I mean, you don't have dozens of professors who are known only as being invited to speak on Uganda, who are not from Uganda, who have no connection to it, but who are anti-Uganda activists, and who propose a one-state solution for Uganda and some neighboring country. I mean, it just doesn't exist. Only when it comes to Israel are there people who actually, you can see they have whole conferences or Zoom meetings or whatever where they talk about the one-state solution, and they don't invite any Palestinians. Nope. They don't invite any Israelis. They invite no one from the places that they're talking about, but they are going to debate whether or not millions of people, will be moved around or forced into one or two states. There's no commonality, by the way, of people that say let's have a one-state solution for the Balkans, i.e., we're going to take Croatia and push it back into a state with Serbia and Macedonia, a whole bunch of states that don't really want to be together. Yeah, but there's no commonality. There's not like a bunch of people who have no connection to the Balkans, but who host whole conferences in New York City to discuss how they will force Czechoslovakia to be in one country again, or, make Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos all into one country. There's nothing like that. No one proposes, well, I'm a one-state solution on the Sudan and South Sudan. I think we're going to recreate Sudan again and push them back together. No, there's no such thing. Only when it comes to Israel. And it's primarily only a certain type of people. We could say Western, Caucasian, Jewish, let's say more white. It's a kind of certain subset of people from the West, privileged. All of them are privileged, basically. And they make a career off of this. It's apparently pretty decent money. But one wonders whether or not it's going to end soon. Is this the last generation in which we're going to have people who grew up their entire lives focusing on Israel? It looks like this might be the last one, where this is kind of an excuse and a way you can profit. And probably there's going to be less interest in this subject going forward for a variety of reasons as countries change and people change and agendas shift, and also as things shift, center of gravity shifts from the west to the east to China to other countries. the whole idea that people will focus just on Israel, because if you go to other countries, like if you travel to the Gulf or I don't know, or China, or basically most of the world, where 80% of the world lives, you'll never find people that are able to make an entire career out of hating Israel. So, I mean, you'll find, of course, people that say, well, Israel, the conflict there is one of many conflicts. I mean, there are certainly no shortage of Middle East experts in some of these countries, but there are not people who make an entire career out of running a group online or something, or hosting one-state solution conferences. There just doesn't exist. You don't have a one-state solution conference in many of these countries. So I think that we might be seeing the last generation is going to have the excuse of being raised with the notion that not only, quote unquote, will I fix the conflict, or I'm a professional peace process, two-state solution, blah, 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 but also just the idea that this will be the last generation of people who can conceivably be called professional anti-Israel activists.